Make sure to check out my Kofi account, link down in the description. And check out my other series, Modern Classics and TV Treasures.
Watch yourself, don't fall off of the shelf.
You must be the new voice in town.
What's that sound? Is someone moving round?
Sit down for a spell. You don't look so well.
Wait a minute, I feel great. You just leave yourself to fate. You might as well just hang around.
It's too late, we've got to operate.
Just try to relax.
It's the House of Wax. Oh, remember Frankenstein. Shivers up my spine. Wow.
I'm for getting out of here.
We'll go to the cellar down below. Trouble is a bubbling in the brew. And while you're down there, Mr. Vincent Price will give you good advice.
He'll know what to do. You just tell him boo.
He will put the moon with the storm, tell you. It's like a movie. It's a big movie show.
Hello, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache. In today's review, I will be collaborating with Silver the Hedgehog. So, welcome him to the show.
Thank you for having me on your show, Henry.
Me and Silver are going to cover Mark of the Vampire.
This film's actually a remake of London After Midnight from 1927. If you're following my channel, you probably know that I actually reviewed that movie. And while the movie wasn't terrible, there were still things in that movie that didn't add up. So, I wasn't afraid to call them out. And while it wasn't massive, I did receive some, I don't want to say backlash, but some negative feedback. So, I'll try to be a little less negative here. But if something doesn't add up, it doesn't add up. And I'm going to point it out.
So, let us review Mark of the Vampire. The film is about a man who was murdered. The doctor examines the body and comes to the conclusion that it was indeed a vampire, either Count Mora or his daughter. To help crack this case, they bring in an expert on the occult, Professor Zewan, to help assist. So, what are our thoughts on this movie? Well, let me give you my thoughts. Well, I like it. I don't know how it compares to London After Midnight, but taken on its own, it's pretty good. Silver, what are your thoughts on Mark of the Vampire?
Considering London After Midnight is often considered to be the holy grail of lost horror films, it is kind of fun looking back and thinking what it might have been like. And after watching that reconstruction that I reviewed on my channel, and watching this movie, I can kinda get an idea of what it would have been like. The movie does a really good job at establishing atmosphere, and unlike the first film where Lon Chaney was the only celebrity I could kinda recognize, this one has a lot of them, including Lionel Atwell and Bela Lugosi.
As stated earlier, The Mark of the Vampire was a remake of the lost silent film London After Midnight. Both happened to be directed by Dracula director Todd Browning. Went through many different versions. Originally, it was said that the film was 80 minutes, but was cut down to 60, mostly due to previews. But it was later said that the film was 75 minutes and was cut down to 80 minutes. Another thing that was cut out was a subplot that suggests incest between both Count Mora and his daughter. Another subplot that was cut was that Count Mora was condemned to be a vampire for eternity. For this crime, he shoots himself out of guilt. This was cut by the production code. That's why in the final film you see some blood on the side of Lugosi's head. Furthermore, Carolyn Borderland, who had already worked with Lugosi on the stage version of Dracula, and answered the call to play the younger vampire without knowing Lugosi was associated with the film, and who got the part because the producers were impressed by how her movements strongly resembled Lugosi, and later revealed that there was another ending. The original ending had Dr. Zealand receive a telegram from his hired actors, who he hired to play the vampires, to trick the murderer, but they were unable to make the train, implying that the vampires in the film were real.
What a twist!
The idea was considered, but was rejected by Browning. She later claimed that both of them were disappointed by the ending, finding it to be absurd. The makeup for the film was done by William J. Tuttle, who also did the makeup for The Wizard of Oz, as well as the makeup for The Time Machine. And outside of some problems with Todd Browning and the crew, the film finally released to pretty positive reviews from the New York Times. Count Mora is played by, as stated earlier, Bela Lugosi, and while he gives a pretty solid performance, he kind of gives off Dracula vibes when playing this character. And I feel like Lon Chaney Sr.'s version of the character is far better in design, with the top hat and the sharp teeth and the crazy Beetlejuice hair. And Luna also has a pretty good creepy design. Apparently her design would later go on to inspire Lily Munster. And I'll say this, Luna is a better portrayal of Lily Munster than the Munsters today, or Cherry Moon Zombies' Lily Munster.
When comparing Bela Lugosi to Lon Chaney's character, I have mixed opinions. Like most people, I do believe Bela Lugosi was the greatest Dracula actor there ever was. But seeing him play another vampire just makes me think he's playing Dracula. He does still deliver a good performance, and I do like his design. I think the bullet wound in his head was definitely a nice touch. But overall, I think I prefer Lon Chaney's look. It just looked more original and unique to me. Seeing Lugosi in this movie just makes me think he's Dracula. One thing about this movie that I like is that the vampires, and I use that term loosely. Anyway, in London After Midnight, they were just referred to as the Man in the Beaver Hat and the Batgirl. In this movie, the lead vampire is named Count Mora, and his daughter is named Luna. I actually like that they have names. Other characters, though, like the maid, went to the extra effort to give some of your characters actual names, but couldn't do the same for others, huh? Maybe she had an actual name in the movie, but if she did, I never heard it.
And then there's Dr. J, which sounds like a nickname that Harley Quinn would call the Joker. He's played by Donald Mink, and it's great to see him. as usual. And then there's Lionel Atwill as an inspector, a role that would later define him in stuff like Son of Frankenstein. And then there's Lionel Barrymore as Professor Zeland, who has a huge interest in the occult and kind of reminds me of Van Helsing the way he talks about vampires. And he is the second Barrymore to be in horror, the first being John Barrymore in the silent Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the second Barrymore being Drew Barrymore in Scream. It's nice to know that horror runs through the Barrymore veins.
Another thing about this movie that I liked is that the vampire setup served more relevance. In the original film, we're told that a gunshot was heard and the victim's death is believed to be suicide. And, spoilers, the vampires in the movie were actually just actors. And that was one of my biggest problems with the movie because the vampire setup didn't really serve much of a point. They're used to try to catch the suspected killer, but considering his death wasn't really related to anything that could be remotely blamed for vampires, it just seemed kinda pointless and just an excuse to have some creepy imagery. In this movie, the victim is found with 2 puncture wounds in his neck, has no blood in his body, and no other forms of damage. And since the villagers already believe in vampires, it's believed that he was killed by a vampire. This made the vampire setup have more meaning to it, and the explanation of how the killer set it up was actually pretty clever. My only problem with it is that I still feel like they could have just hypnotized the suspect and asked him if he was the killer. Like I said in my review, I was told that most people under hypnosis don't lie. Still, I like that attention to detail.
With that said, I wish they had kept the twist ending of them turning out to be real vampires, because this twist feels very outdated. As I said in my Dracula review, silent horror films were very different, very Scooby-Doo-esque. They rarely focused on the supernatural, and those that did were foreign films like Nosferatu. Hell, even Cabinet of Dr. Caligari had a twist ending, with it turning out to be in a man's head. And with all the new supernatural creatures like Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy coming in, this twist feels very behind the times.
Most of the special effects aren't bad, but one stuck out to me like a sore thumb. A toy spider. Really?
Effects are really hit and miss. Some of them feel like something you would get at a Spirit Halloween, like bats on a string. Others are pretty good, like Luna having giant bat wings. It kind of reminds me of something straight out of Van Helsing.
Well, for a few more bits of dialogue on my end, I will say this scene was actually pretty funny. Cat jump scare? Maybe?
Don't you think that's a little forced?
What do you want? They sprung it on me!
Okay. Calm your marijuana-shaped quills. One problem with the film is that it uses real-life animals, and there are some moments where it's downright cruel. Like, there's a scene where they're shooting at a real-life bat. I hope that bat was okay. And just like a lot of horror films at the time, there are parts where it does drag. And the character of Irene was flat out forgettable. I don't remember a thing about this character, and she barely contributes much to the plot.
Most of the issues I had with London After Midnight are still present here. In my review, I mentioned how there was a scene where some of the actors flew. Unlike that movie where I didn't know for sure, here... Yeah, how did they pull that off if they're just actors? I don't think they were that good at hiding wires in the 30s. Not to mention her arms apparently turned into wings there. Plus, maybe the characters were lying, but there's a scene where one of the vampires played by Bela Lugosi transformed from a bat to a man. And even if that scene never happened, there's little to no suspense in this movie. The supposed vampires make their presence known to the audience at all times, and aside from a few scenes that are actually pretty creepy, like one scene where Luna was looking through the window, they don't really do anything incredibly shocking or violent. I'm not saying that all horror films need to be bloody and violent, but if you're gonna call something a horror film, it needs to be, well, scary.
Again, I don't know how this compares to the original. Well, I can say it's definitely a solid vampire movie. I give it 5 gold stars.
Overall, I think I feel the same way about this movie as I did about London After Midnight. Good and bad. The good stuff in it really makes the movie an enjoyable watch, and the bad stuff really does distract. Overall, I still kinda recommend it. I don't think it's as good as some of the classic movies like Dracula or Frankenstein, but I still liked it for the most part. I don't really do ratings on my show, but for this video, I give both London After Midnight and Mark of the Vampire 3 stars out of 5.
Pretty much all we have to say about Mark of the Vampire. I want to thank Silver for taking part of this collab.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show, Henry. I hope you have a happy Halloween, and tell that gangster punk Sal that he still owes me 10 rings.
Don't worry, Silver. I'll tell Sal as soon as I can. Well, until the next review, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache, signing off.
This is weird. It's much worse than I feared. I'll close my eyes and make it disappear.
This is strange. It ain't home on the range.
You just tell St. Pete that you got cold feet.